Let me go back. So there's a few different causes of fatigue in the workplace. Sleep loss is really the biggest cause of fatigue, as well as circadian rhythm misalignment, and that just refers to your body needing to function during the nighttime hours, and say you're on like a night shift, when it wouldn't normally be able to do that because your body wants to be asleep. That's what we refer to circadian rhythm misalignment. And then another cause of fatigue is work or task demands, and that could be your job or maybe your work environment. So we'll start off by talking about one of the largest causes of fatigue, which is sleep loss. We recently conducted a study, and we asked over 2,000 working Americans about their sleep habits. We found that 43% of the workers in our survey reported sleeping less than 7 hours a day, which means that almost half of our workforce is chronically sleep deprived. So this is really concerning, right, when you think about the effects of fatigue in the workplace, the productivity effects, the safety effects. So we've really been conditioned as a society to believe that sleep is not very important. Maybe it's something you do when you're dead. I'm sure a lot of us have heard that. Many people are often rewarded for working really long hours, rather than those who take their time and get their proper rest. People often joke that you're lazy if you're prioritizing sleep, but we're finding more and more every day just how important sleep is for our health, but also our safety and the safety of those around us. So in our survey of working Americans, we asked them about their habits in the workplace, if they've ever experienced fatigue. Specifically, we asked about micro-sleep, so that's kind of like nodding off. I'm sure many of us have felt that wee into the night when we're trying to squeeze a movie in before bed. But unfortunately, people are falling asleep on the job. 27% of our 2,000 survey respondents reported falling asleep on the job in the past month. 16% reported falling asleep while driving in the past month, and then 41% report unintentionally falling asleep off the job in the past month. So people are literally falling asleep on our roads and in our workplaces, which is pretty extreme, especially for those that are in safety-sensitive industries. I mean, could you imagine a trucker driving down the highway 65 miles an hour and dozing off? I mean, it really can be dangerous. So why are we not getting enough sleep? There's a few different reasons. A lot of us are just not prioritizing sleep the way that we should. Maybe we're trying to squeeze in just one more episode on Netflix before we go to bed. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes, especially on the weekends. But some of us are trying to squeeze in another hour of work after the kids go to sleep. Maybe they're sending emails while laying in bed. Not prioritizing sleep is one of the major reasons why people are sleep deprived. But for some of us, work schedules can often make it difficult to get enough sleep. Maybe you're working long days, 10 hours, 12 hours. Some people are working 16-hour days. Then you have to commute back and forth to work. And then if you think about, home responsibilities that you have to take care of, eating dinner, often sleep is sacrificed on our to-do list. So shift workers, especially those who work like night shifts or early morning shifts, even those rotating shift schedules, they've been well documented in the research to be chronically sleep deprived because of their work schedules. But a huge barrier to getting proper sleep is an untreated sleep disorder, which is far more common than people realize. This is a real physical barrier to getting proper sleep. That's all too common. They say 50 to 70 million people in the United States are living with a sleep disorder, and unfortunately, up to 90% of those are undiagnosed and untreated. So people don't know that they are at risk. And sleep disorders have a huge strain on the economy. It's very expensive. Sleep problems cost the U.S. economy about $410 billion annually. And that cost largely falls on the employer in terms of lost productivity, absenteeism, the cost for accidents and injuries, as well as increased health care expenditure. So let's talk about a few sleep problems If you're not familiar, obstructive sleep apnea is really one of the biggest ones. They say about 30% of the population has obstructive sleep apnea, and that's when you have a blockage in your airway while you're sleeping. There's a couple reasons why that could happen, but it's frequently noticed as loud snoring when you're sleeping. And then the other big sleep disorder to be aware of is insomnia, and that really presents as trouble falling asleep or trouble staying asleep. So those are really the big kind of violators in sleep disorder. Most employers recognize that fatigue is an impairment that affects productivity. We all know that sluggish feeling when we're tired, and it's been well documented as research as well. Studies show that sleep problems decrease productivity by about 6%. So for someone that does not have a sleep disorder, but maybe just isn't prioritizing sleep, they're going to lose about 4 days a year in presenteeism from work. That means they're physically at work, but they're not being as productive as they would be if they had a full night's rest. So for an untreated insomniac, they're actually going to lose about 11 days a year where they're present at work, but they're not necessarily as productive as they should be. And this is really costly for the employer. Sleep deficiency, not getting at least 7 hours a day, and untreated sleep disorders cost employers about $2,500 per employee per year in productivity loss, about $1,700 per employee per year for missed days of work. So it really adds up. But really, sleep problems affect safety, which is obviously one of our largest concerns. We want to make sure our workforce is safe. A 2014 meta-analysis showed that 13% of workplace injuries could be attributed to sleep problems. The National Transportation Safety Board, who investigates large, often fatal crashes, found that 20% of their investigations identified fatigue as a probable cause, a contributing factor, or a finding. And when they looked at their highway crashes, they actually found that fatigue was involved about 40% of the time. So this is really concerning, the amount of drowsy driving that's going on and just how fatal it can be. So the AAA Foundation did a study a few years ago, and they looked at fatal crashes, and they estimate that about 21% of all fatal crashes may involve a drowsy driver. So again, it's very prevalent, and it's very scary, people falling asleep while driving. So accidents and injuries are obviously very costly for the employer, and there's not a lot of solid or reliable evidence on how much sleep problems cost the employer in terms of accidents and injuries. But it's been suggested that a hypothetical, small trucking company could be losing millions of dollars a year due to crashes and injuries related to undiagnosed and untreated sleep disorders. And I'll talk about that in a case study in just a minute. But I want to make one more comment about how sleep problems affect our health. We talked about obstructive sleep apnea. That's the one that's kind of related to loud snoring. It is a big symptom of that. But it's associated with diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, even early mortality. There are studies that show that obstructive sleep apnea can shave like 15 years off your life. So it's scary stuff. And then on the flip side, we have insomnia, also another very prevalent sleep disorder that's associated with depression, hypertension, and early mortality as well. So because of all these health effects of fatigue, again, costs are going to fall on the employer in terms of increased health care costs. So studies estimate that it costs an employer about $3,000 per employee per year in increased health care costs if they're not getting 7 hours of sleep a day or if they have an untreated sleep disorder. So for an employer with about 700 employees, they can expect to pay about $1 million a year to sustain those employees that are not getting enough sleep or that have an untreated sleep disorder. So we actually worked with Harvard University's Brigham and Women's Hospital to create a fatigue cost calculator to help employers estimate how much fatigue could be costing their workforce. So this is a free online tool. You can go on to nsc.org/tired-at-work. You enter some information about your workforce, such as your location, your industry, how many employees you have, and if you have shift workers. So we're going to do an example here of a national company that does transportation, and they have about 1,000 employees that work a rotating shift schedule. So for this transportation company with about 1,000 employees, they're losing about $1.75 million every year to carry employees that aren't getting enough sleep or that have an untreated sleep disorder. And that costs are in terms of absenteeism, decreased productivity, as well as increased health care costs. The calculator will also show you what prevalence of your workforce might be at risk for a sleep disorder. So for this company, this trucking company or transportation company with about 1,000 employees, they're looking at about 114 employees with obstructive sleep apnea, 122 with insomnia, and then also some restless leg and shift work disorder issues as well. And at the end of the calculator, it will tell you how much money you could save if you implemented a sleep health program. So if you see the little slider here, this is referencing how many employees you have engaged in a program. So for this transportation company, if they engaged half of their workforce in a sleep health program, they would save about $850,000 a year in their costs. Now, if they engaged all of their workforce, they'd recoup almost all of their losses minus however much it would cost to have that program. So what is a sleep health program? We like to look at it as education with a sleep disorder screening. So we actually had a team come in and deliver a sleep health program to our employees here at the National Safety Council, and they came in, they did an hour presentation for us, and then we filled out some questions on an iPad, completely anonymous. We did not have to enter any personal information about ourselves. You answered maybe 20 questions about kind of your sleep habits and symptoms you may have, and the iPad would tell you right there whether or not you are at risk for a sleep disorder. So if an employee did test positive or have an increased risk for a sleep disorder, we would hope that they would go to follow up with their doctor to get treated for that. Now, again, we did not collect any information on it, so we don't know who screened positive, but some companies do work with their employees to ensure that they get followed up for treatment. So again, for this company that had 50% engaged, they recouped a good percentage of their losses, and if they had all of their employees engaged, they would recoup almost all of their losses. So you can check out our cost calculator, nsc.org/tired-at-work, and I want to give you a little case study of a company who's doing sleep health programs very well. Schneider Trucking is a national leader in sleep disorder screening, and they have great results with their program. In 2006, Schneider became the first large-scale employer with a program to screen, diagnose, and monitor obstructive sleep apnea, treatment adherence. This is one of the largest programs in the U.S., and it was the very first one. So there's currently no federal regulations or requirements for truck drivers to be screened or be compliant with obstructive sleep apnea. Schneider just wanted to go above and beyond and ensure that their drivers are as safe as possible. So in Schneider's program, all new drivers are screened for obstructive sleep apnea. If they screen positive, the treatment for obstructive sleep apnea is then covered by their insurance. And so treatment for obstructive sleep apnea would include a CPAP machine, a continuous positive airway machine. And this is worn while they're sleeping, and it increases the airflow into their throat so that it's not collapsing when they're breathing, which is one of the most common causes of obstructive sleep apnea. So Schneider actually partnered with some university sleep researchers to look at the success of their program, and I'll give you some of their stats that they found. So drivers with untreated obstructive sleep apnea had 5 times the risk as those drivers that were complying with treatment. So if you want to put that into a little bit of perspective, if you look at 1,000 drivers a year, those with obstructive sleep apnea have 70 preventable crashes versus 14 that are being treated. But Schneider has obviously more than 1,000 drivers on the road. I think they have somewhere around like 15,000, maybe even 20,000 if I'm remembering my estimate correctly. So they found that about 20% of their drivers had obstructive sleep apnea. So with their treatment program, they found that those that get treated, it actually resulted in a 73% reduction in their preventable crashes. And as you can imagine, that has some cost savings for them if they're not paying for these crashes. They also found that obstructive sleep apnea treatment resulted in almost 50% reduction in their health care spending for those members who had a previously untreated obstructive sleep apnea. So they found huge financial gains, both in decreasing their crash risk and decreasing their health care spending, and they're actually working with those university researchers to estimate how much their savings are, but they are looking at savings in the billions for how much they have saved since implementing this program. So I want to say quickly before we close, fatigue can be managed at both home and in the workplace. We promote fatigue risk management systems, which are basically policies, practices, programs, and procedures that look at where your risk is in regards to fatigue in the workplace and then implementing countermeasures to reduce that risk. So we have more information available on our website at nsc.org/fatigue kit. And then you should definitely go after this and check out our fatigue calculator, and that is at nsc.org/tired@work. And that is all I have for you. I can take any questions if you want to type them into the chat box, because I believe you're muted. Otherwise, shoot me an email. My email address is up here. I'd love to hear from you if you have any experience with these issues, if you're dealing with fatigue in the workplace, if you have implemented any countermeasures to reduce any risk, or if you have any questions. I'd love to hear them. Thank you. And Cindy, I'm having trouble seeing my Q&A bar, so if there's any questions, would you mind reading them out to me?
Absolutely. I can see your Q&A bar, but I don't see any questions at this time. So with that, I think we'll just thank Emily for being with us today. We greatly appreciate the information that you shared, and hopefully this will help employers keep employees safer. In fact, I know it does. The cost calculators, when we talk about them in training, are always really popular with employers. People like to play with numbers, and the very fact that they have this fatigue calculator available to them just encourages them to seek out the workplace fatigue environment and its importance and make changes as they need. And NSC does a great job of helping them do that. We appreciate attendees taking a few minutes to complete the post-event survey. With that, this concludes the webinar. Have a great day.